Stay with me. Do you hear me? Look at me. Christian's voice, usually a cold instrument of command, cracked with a raw, unfamiliar terror. The diner floor was a sea of shattered porcelain and spilled coffee, but all he saw was the spreading crimson stain on the cheap blue fabric of the waitress's uniform. Beneath her trembling, blood-soaked body, his 5-year-old twins whimpered, perfectly untouched. She had thrown herself into the crossfire, a complete stranger absorbing the hollow-point bullet meant to tear his entire world apart, as her pale eyes fluttered shut and her breath hitched into a terrifyingly shallow rattle. The most ruthless boss in the city realized he was holding a dying angel. The relentless rhythm of the rain lashing against the grimy windows of Rosie's diner provided a dreary soundtrack to what had already been an exhausting Tuesday afternoon. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of fried onions, stale coffee, and the faint metallic tang of damp wool coats. Lucy leaned against the chipped formica counter, a damp rag clutched in her raw, overwashed hands. She was 24, running on 4 hours of sleep, and the desperate need to make rent by Friday. Her feet ached in her scuffed, non-slip shoes, but her expression remained softly accommodating as she watched the scattered afternoon patrons nurse their lukewarm mugs. It was a life of quiet desperation, measured out in dimes and quarters left as tips, but it was honest, and it was hers. The brass bell above the front door didn't just jingle. It practically screamed as the heavy glass door was pushed open with deliberate force. A blast of frigid autumn air swept through the diner, momentarily cutting through the grease-laden warmth. Lucy looked up, her customer service smile faltering just a fraction as the atmosphere in the room instantly shifted. The ambient chatter of the few regulars died entirely. 3 men entered. The 2 flanking the door were built like brick walls, their eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses despite the gloom outside, their tailored overcoats failing to conceal the bulky outlines of weapons holstered beneath. But it was the man in the center who commanded the absolute, suffocating silence of the room. Christian. Even in a neighborhood disconnected from the high-stakes underworld of the inner city, rumors had a face, and his was chiseled from cold, unforgiving marble. He wore a bespoke, charcoal suit that looked like it cost more than the diner itself. His dark eyes swept the room, cataloging every exit, every patron, every potential threat with the calculating precision of a predator. Yet, it wasn't his imposing, terrifying aura that caught Lucy's breath. It was what, or rather, who he was holding. Clinging tightly to his massive hands were 2 small children, a boy and a girl, no older than 5, with matching curls of dark hair and wide, innocent eyes that mirrored their father's striking features. Though devoid of his hardened cynicism, they wore miniature, pristine coats, looking entirely out of place in the dingy establishment. Booth in the back. "Away from the windows," Christian ordered, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that didn't need volume to demand absolute obedience. The 2 massive guards immediately moved, securing the perimeter of the corner booth, before Christian gently ushered his children into the cracked vinyl seats. Lucy swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. The veteran waitress, Brenda, suddenly found herself very busy wiping down a spotless coffee machine. Lucy knew what that meant. Taking a deep breath, she picked up 3 menus and a carafe of fresh coffee, forcing her tired legs to carry her across the black and white checkered floor. As she approached, the air around the booth felt dense, practically vibrating with unseen tension. One of the guards stepped slightly into her path, a silent warning, but Christian raised a single, gloved finger. The guard backed down instantly. "Afternoon," Lucy said, her voice softer than usual, trying to keep her hands from trembling as she placed the menus down. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" Christian didn't look at the menu. His dark, penetrating gaze locked onto her, stripping away her practiced, polite facade and seeing right through to the exhaustion underneath. For a fleeting second, she saw a flicker of something human, perhaps a weary father, just trying to find a quiet moment for his kids. Just water for the table. And milk for them, he said, gesturing to the twins. I want chocolate milk, please. The little girl piped up, her voice a sweet, bell-like chime that seemed to cut right through the heavy gloom of the room. Me too, the boy added. Kicking his small legs, Lucy's anxiety melted just a fraction. Children were children, no matter who their father was. She offered them a genuine, warm smile, the kind that reached her tired eyes. 2 chocolate milks coming right up, with whipped cream on top if it's okay with your dad. She glanced tentatively at Christian. Christian stared at her, slightly taken aback by her gentle, unafraid interaction with his children. In his world, people either cowered or calculated. This waitress was just looking at his children like they were normal kids. He gave a slow, barely perceptible nod. Whipped cream is fine. As Lucy walked away to prepare the drinks, she could feel the weight of Christian's eyes on her back. When she returned with the towering glasses of chocolate milk and a sleek black coffee he hadn't ordered but she figured he needed, she noticed the way he positioned his body. He sat on the outside of the booth, his broad shoulders acting as a physical shield between his children and the rest of the room. He was a man steeped in violence, but in that quiet, suspended moment, he was fiercely, overwhelmingly protective. For the next 20 minutes, Lucy watched from the counter as the feared Mafia boss cut up pancakes into tiny, perfect squares, wiping a smudge of chocolate from his daughter's chin with a surprisingly gentle napkin swipe. It was a jarring, confusing juxtaposition. The diner had returned to its low hum, the tension dialing back to a manageable thrum. The rain continued to fall, wrapping the diner in a deceptive cocoon of safety. Lucy found herself stealing glances, captivated by the quiet intimacy of the family, unaware that the heavy, bulletproof glass of the diner's front doors was about to be put to the ultimate test. The storm outside was nothing compared to the hell that was about to break loose. The transition from mundane quiet to catastrophic violence did not happen in slow motion. It erupted with the sudden, deafening concussiveness of a nightmare crashing into reality. 1 second, Lucy was sliding a fresh cherry pie into the glass display case, listening to the gentle clatter of forks against plates from Christian's booth. The next second, the world tore itself apart. It started with the screech of heavy tires skidding on wet asphalt directly outside the diner, a sound so violent it made everyone freeze. Before anyone could process the threat, the heavy front windows exploded. It wasn't just a break, it was a total disintegration of glass, raining down in thousands of razor-sharp shards as the deafening roar of automatic gunfire ripped through the diner. The noise was absolute, a physical force that punched the air out of Lucy's lungs. The pristine cherry pie exploded, showering her face in sticky red filling and powdered glass. Screams erupted, raw, primal shrieks of terror from the patrons as they threw themselves to the linoleum floor. The heavy booths splintered under the barrage of heavy-caliber bullets, stuffing flying through the air like grotesque snow. Down! Christian's roar cut through the gunfire, a sound of pure, terrifying fury. Lucy dropped to her knees behind the counter, her hands covering her ears, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. She could smell the acrid, choking sulfur of gunpowder and the metallic tang of blood in the air. Peeking through a gap between the counter and the pie case, she saw chaos. The 2 men who had accompanied Christian were already dead. One slumped over a table, the other lying motionless near the door, their weapons drawn but unfired. They had been taken completely by surprise by a heavily armed strike team moving into the diner with lethal, coordinated precision. Christian had upended the heavy oak table in a fraction of a second, creating a barricade for his twins. He was returning fire with a heavy, matte black handgun, his face a mask of cold, murderous rage. He dropped the first two attackers who breached the door. But there were more, at least 4 men clad in tactical black. Their weapons focused entirely on the corner booth. "Daddy!" The terrified, high-pitched scream of the little girl pierced through the mechanical roar of the guns. Lucy's eyes snapped to the booth. Christian was pinned down. He was leaning out, laying down suppressive fire, completely exposed, as he tried to buy his children an extra inch of safety. But the angle was wrong. One of the gunmen, moving swiftly through the kitchen corridor to flank them, had a clear line of sight on the space underneath the overturned table where the twins huddled, clutching each other in paralyzed terror. The gunman raised his weapon, the barrel leveling directly at the 2 weeping children. Christian, engaged with the men at the front, didn't see the flanker. Time, which had been rushing at breakneck speed, suddenly snapped into an agonizing, viscous crawl for Lucy. She didn't think. There was no conscious decision, no weighing of her own life against theirs. There was only the profound, unbearable certainty that those children were about to die, and that she was the only one close enough to change the geometry of the room. Lucy surged up from behind the counter. Her scuffed diner shoes found traction in the spilled grease and blood. She vaulted over the low partition, her body moving faster than her terror. "No!" she screamed, though she couldn't even hear her own voice over the gunfire. She sprinted the 15 feet across the open aisle, fully exposing herself to the crossfire. Out of the corner of his eye, Christian saw a blur of a blue uniform streaking across his peripheral vision. He spun, his heart dropping into his stomach as he finally saw the flanked gunman leveling his weapon at his children. Christian raised his gun, but he was a fraction of a second too late. The gunman pulled the trigger. Simultaneously, Lucy dove. She didn't tackle the gunman. She didn't have a weapon. She threw her own fragile body violently across the open space, sliding across the blood-slicked floor, twisting in midair to form a human shield over the terrified, trembling bodies of the twins. The sound of the bullet striking her was a sickening, wet thwack that seemed louder than the gunfire itself. The kinetic impact was devastating. It felt as though a red-hot sledgehammer had been driven through her upper back, right below her shoulder blade. The breath was violently expelled from her lungs in a choked gasp. She collapsed heavily on top of the children, her vision instantly whiting out, a searing, unbearable agony radiating from her chest. In the immediate aftermath of her fall, Christian fired. 2 rounds, perfectly placed, taking the flanker in the chest and head. The man dropped like a stone, with his children momentarily covered. Christian unleashed a terrifying, suppressed fury, advancing from the booth and methodically executing the remaining attackers in a span of 5 brutal seconds. Then, sudden, ringing silence fell over the diner, broken only by the whimpers of the patrons and the violent, wet gasps of the waitress on the floor. Christian dropped his empty weapon and dropped to his knees, his hands instantly reaching under the table. He grabbed Lucy by the shoulders and gently, desperately pulled her back. The twins were underneath, screaming, covered in blood, but unharmed. They were entirely uninjured. Lucy lay on her back, staring up at the flickering fluorescent lights. Her cheap blue uniform was rapidly turning a dark, shining crimson. Her lips were parted, her chest fighting for air that wouldn't come. Christian's hands, usually so steady, shook violently as he pressed his coat against the massive exit wound near her collarbone. "Stay with me. Do you hear me? Look at me," he roared. The cold Mafia boss entirely gone, replaced by a desperate, terrified man. He looked down at this girl, this nobody waitress working for minimum wage, who had just thrown away her life to save the children of a criminal. As she looked up at him, her eyes clouded with pain and fading light. He realized with crushing certainty that he was holding an angel in his bloodied hands. The emergency room doors blasted open with a violence that made the triage nurses jump. Christian carried Lucy in his arms, sprinting past the security desk with a complete disregard for protocol. His tailored suit was ruined, soaked through with her blood. His hands sticky and crimson. Close behind him, two newly arrived enforcers hurried the traumatized, blood-spattered twins into the secure waiting area. "I need a trauma team. Now." Christian's voice was a physical shockwave in the sterile environment. Nurses and a doctor swarmed them instantly. They transferred Lucy onto a gurney, tearing open her ruined blue uniform. The amount of blood was staggering. Christian stepped back, his chest heaving, his eyes locked onto her pale, lifeless face as they wheeled her rapidly down the hall, shouting medical shorthand that sounded to him like the countdown to an execution. "Pulse is thready. BP is dropping, 70/40. She's got a tension pneumothorax. We need a chest tube immediately. Get her to OR. 1. Move." The doors swung shut, cutting him off from the chaotic scene. Christian stood alone in the center of the hallway, a dark island of violence in a sea of sterile white. He looked down at his hands. They were trembling. He, who had ordered the deaths of men without a flinch, who had built an empire on calculated ruthlessness, was unraveling over the fate of a woman whose last name he didn't even know. An hour passed. Then, too, the hospital went into a soft lockdown. Dozens of Christian's men flooded the perimeter, securing the building against any secondary attacks. The police arrived, but Christian's high-priced lawyers intercepted them, keeping the official inquiries at a manageable distance. Christian sat on a plastic chair in the private waiting room, staring blankly at the wall. The twins, Leo and Mia, had been cleaned up and were sleeping fitfully on a couch across from him, exhausted by their tears. Every time Mia whimpered in her sleep, a fresh wave of self-loathing washed over Christian. The attack was the Maroney family. It had to be. They had broken the unspoken rule. They had gone after his children. His second in command, a grizzled man named Marcus, entered the room quietly. "Boss, the perimeter is secure. We hit 2 of Maroney's stash houses in retaliation. The streets are burning." Christian didn't look up. "Burn them all to ash," he whispered, his voice deadly quiet. "I want Maroney's head. I want everyone who knew about this order buried." "It's being done," Marcus said softly. He hesitated, looking at Christian's blood-stained shirt. "Boss, why did she do it?" "The waitress." Christian finally lifted his head. His eyes were bloodshot, haunted. "I don't know, Marcus. She didn't know me. She didn't know them. She just saw a gun pointed at children, and she jumped. In my world, everyone has an angle. Everyone wants a payoff. What was her angle?" "Maybe she's just a good person," Marcus offered, a rare note of genuine awe in his rough voice. The concept felt alien to Christian. He had spent his life surrounded by vipers, constantly waiting for the strike in the dark. To witness an act of pure, selfless sacrifice, it shattered the cynical lens through which he viewed the entire universe. The heavy door to the waiting room finally clicked open. A surgeon in green scrub stepped in, pulling down his surgical mask. He looked exhausted. Christian was on his feet in an instant, crossing the room with predatory speed, his presence towering over the doctor. "Is she alive?" Christian demanded, his voice dangerously low. The surgeon let out a long breath. It was incredibly close. The bullet shattered her clavicle, nicked her subclavian artery, and collapsed her right lung. She lost a massive amount of blood. The doctor paused, looking at Christian's intimidating stature. "But we managed to stop the bleeding. We repaired the artery and inflated the lung. She is in a medically induced coma in the ICU to help her body stabilize. She's critical, but she's alive. She's fighting. Christian felt a massive, invisible weight ease slightly off his chest. He closed his eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath. I want your best people on her round the clock. Spare no expense. Bring in specialists from out of state if you have to. If she needs a machine, buy the company that makes it. Do you understand? Yes, sir. We're doing everything we can. The surgeon nodded quickly. When will she wake up? If her vitals remain stable, we'll lift the sedation tomorrow morning, but her recovery, it's going to be long. She's going to be in a lot of pain. Christian nodded. He turned back to look at his sleeping children. They were breathing softly, safe, because a waitress making minimum wage had decided their lives were worth more than hers. He turned back to Marcus, his expression hardening into an unbreakable resolve. Put a guard on her door. No one goes in but the medical staff. When she wakes up, I want to be the first person she sees, Christian commanded. He looked down at his blood-stained hands once more. She saved my soul today, Marcus, and I swear on my life, she will never want for anything again. Coming back to consciousness was not a gentle drift. It was a violent dragging from the depths of a dark, suffocating ocean. The first thing Lucy registered was the rhythmic, electronic beep of a heart monitor, loud and piercing in the heavy silence. The second thing was the pain. It wasn't a sharp sting, but a massive, crushing agony radiating from her chest, wrapping around her ribs like a vice of hot iron. She gasped, her eyes flying open, instantly blinded by the soft ambient lighting of the room. She tried to move her arm, to reach for her chest, but a gentle, firm hand immediately caught her wrist. Don't move. You're safe. Try to breathe slowly. The voice was deep, resonant, and achingly familiar. As her vision slowly cleared, the blurry shapes in the room sharpened. She wasn't in a standard hospital room. The walls were paneled in warm wood. The linens on her bed felt like heavy silk, and the machines monitoring her were sleek and modern. It looked like a luxury hotel suite that had been converted into a high-tech medical bay. Sitting in a leather armchair beside her bed, looking entirely out of place in the sterile environment, was Christian. He was no longer wearing a suit. He wore a simple black cashmere sweater, dark circles bruising the skin under his eyes, his jaw covered in a harsh, dark stubble. He looked entirely exhausted, yet his intense gaze was locked onto her with unwavering focus. Lucy swallowed, her throat feeling like it was lined with shattered glass. Water, she rasped. The word, barely a whisper. Christian moved instantly. He poured water from a glass pitcher into a cup with a bent straw, bringing it carefully to her lips. He supported the back of her head with an astonishingly gentle hand. The cool water was absolute heaven. She drank greedily until he gently pulled it away. Slowly, he cautioned. He sat back down, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees. You're in a private wing at St. Jude's. You've been out for 2 days. You took a bullet to the upper chest. The memories crashed into her like a physical blow. The diner, the screaming, the shattering glass, the terrible cold metal of the gun pointed at the little girl. Lucy's breath hitched, panic flaring in her chest, aggravating the terrible pain. The kids, the twins, are they? They're completely unharmed, Christian said, his voice dropping an octave, thick with a heavy, unspeakable emotion. Not a scratch on them. Because of you. Lucy closed her eyes, letting out a long, shuddering sigh of pure relief. Thank God, she whispered. A tear slipped free from the corner of her eye, tracking down her pale cheek. She wasn't crying from the pain. She was crying because the nightmare hadn't ended in tragedy. Christian stared at her, genuinely baffled by the purity of her relief. "Do you know who I am?" he asked quietly, the question hanging heavy. In the room, Lucy opened her eyes and looked at him. "I know people are afraid of you. I know you're involved in bad things. The diner owner told us to always be invisible when you came in." And yet, Christian leaned closer, his dark eyes searching hers. "When men came to kill me, when they pointed a gun at my children, you didn't stay invisible. You threw yourself in front of a hollow-point bullet. Why?" Lucy shifted slightly, wincing at the flare of agony in her shoulder. She looked at him, her expression confused by his confusion. "Why?" "Because they were children. They were babies. What was I supposed to do? Hide behind the counter and watch them die?" "Yes," Christian stated bluntly. "That's exactly what every other person in that diner did. That's what human survival instinct dictates. You threw your life away for strangers." "I didn't throw it away," Lucy argued weakly, her voice raspy but firm. "I traded it. And it was a good trade. They're safe." Christian sat back, running a hand heavily over his face. He was a man who understood leverage, debt, and fear. He did not understand this. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, black checkbook. He clicked a pen, writing a series of numbers that would take Lucy 3 lifetimes to earn pouring coffee. He tore it out and laid it gently on the tray table across her lap. "This is just the beginning," Christian said, his tone authoritative. "Your hospital bills are covered. Your rent is paid for the next 10 years. If you want a house, point to it on a map, and it's yours. You will never work another day in your life unless you choose to." Lucy looked down at the check. The number of zeros made her dizzy. She stared at it for a long moment, the silence in the room thickening. Then, painfully, slowly, she raised her left uninjured arm. She picked up the check, and, with a weak but deliberate motion, she tore it in half. Christian froze, his eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" "I don't want your money," Lucy said, letting the torn pieces fall to the sheets. "I didn't save them for a reward. I saved them because they deserve to grow up. Taking money for that, it makes it dirty. It makes it a transaction." "It's not a transaction. It's a debt," Christian insisted, a flare of frustration in his voice. "I owe you. My family owes you. You owe me nothing," Lucy replied softly, her eyelids growing heavy as the pain medication in her IV began to surge. "Just keep them safe. Be a good father to them. That's all the payment I want." Christian watched as her eyes fluttered shut, her breathing evening out as she slipped back into a medicated sleep. He stared at the torn pieces of the check on her lap. In his dark, treacherous world, he had just encountered a soul so blindingly pure, it hurt to look at it. She didn't want his money. She didn't fear his power. She just wanted his children to be safe. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands together. The Mafia boss had spent his life building fortresses to keep his enemies out. But looking at the fragile, sleeping woman in the hospital bed, he realized she had effortlessly bypassed every wall he had ever built. 3 weeks passed in a blur of agonizing physical therapy, fading bruises, and the slow, knitting repair of bone and tissue. Lucy's recovery was faster than expected, fueled by a stubborn resilience that surprised her doctors. However, the day she was cleared for discharge, the reality of her new situation crashed down upon her. She was sitting on the edge of her hospital bed, awkwardly trying to button a fresh blouse over her heavy bandages with one hand. When Christian entered, he looked impeccable, back in his tailored armor, radiating an aura of absolute command. Behind him stood Marcus, holding a luxurious cashmere coat. "I have a cab waiting," Lucy said defensively. feeling small under his intense gaze. My landlord called. He said someone paid my rent for the year. Was that you? I told you I was handling it, Christian said smoothly, stepping into the room and taking the coat from Marcus. He moved to her side, gently draping the heavy, warm fabric over her shoulders, incredibly careful to avoid her injured side. But you aren't going back to your apartment, Lucy. Lucy stiffened. Excuse me? Yes, I am. I have a life. I have plants that are probably dead, and I need to get back to work. The men who attacked the diner were part of the Maroney syndicate. Christian cut in, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. I have dismantled their leadership over the last 3 weeks, but there are loyalists scattered. You are the woman who ruined their hit and saved my heirs. You are a loose end. If you go back to that unsecure apartment, you will be dead before morning. A cold chill ran down Lucy's spine. The memory of the gunman flashed in her mind, the deafening noise, the blood. She swallowed hard, suddenly feeling incredibly vulnerable. So, what? I'm supposed to just go into hiding? You are coming home with me, Christian stated. It wasn't an invitation, it was a mandate. My estate is a fortress. You will have a medical team on staff, security detail, and time to heal fully. Until I can guarantee the streets are entirely clear, you stay with my family. Lucy wanted to argue, to fight for her independence, but the icy certainty in his eyes told her it was pointless. He wasn't trying to control her, he was trying to keep her breathing. An hour later, Lucy was sitting in the back of an armored SUV, staring out the tinted windows as they drove through massive wrought-iron gates into a sprawling, wooded estate. The house was a colossal stone manor, beautiful but intimidating, surrounded by high walls and subtle, yet highly visible, security patrols. It looked less like a home and more like a medieval keep. As she stepped out of the vehicle, the heavy oak front doors swung open. 2 small figures burst out onto the sprawling stone portico, ignoring the stern calls of an older woman who looked like a nanny. Lucy! Leo and Mia sprinted down the steps, launching themselves at her. Lucy gasped, stepping back slightly to brace herself, but Christian's large hand immediately shot out, gently catching the children by the scruffs of their collars before they could impact her healing chest. Careful, Christian chided them, though his voice was remarkably soft. Remember what we talked about? Lucy is still hurt. Gentle hugs only. The twins looked up at him, then carefully wrapped their small arms around Lucy's waist, burying their faces against her coat. We missed you, Mia mumbled into the fabric. Daddy said you were sleeping for a long time. Tears pricked at the corners of Lucy's eyes. She carefully placed her good hand on Mia's dark curls, resting her injured arm lightly on Leo's shoulder. I missed you guys too. I'm so glad you're okay. For the next week, Lucy lived in a state of surreal displacement. She was given a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment building floor, complete with a massive marble-soaking tub and a balcony overlooking manicured gardens. The staff treated her with a level of reverence that made her deeply uncomfortable. To them, she wasn't a guest, she was a savior. But it was the house itself that felt wrong. It was impeccably clean, filled with priceless art and antique furniture, but it felt cold. It lacked the warmth, the chaotic, messy hum of a real family. Christian was often gone, sequestered in his study behind heavy mahogany doors, dealing with the violent fallout of the diner attack. The twins spent most of their time with tutors or their rigid nanny, playing quietly in designated areas. Lucy couldn't stand it. As her strength returned, she began to quietly rebel against the estate's sterile perfection. It started in the kitchen. She bypassed the private chef, finding the massive, industrial-grade kitchen late one afternoon. When Christian returned home that evening, Expecting the usual silent, formal dining experience, he was hit by the overwhelming scent of baking sugar and cinnamon. He found his children covered in flour, sitting on the marble island, giggling uncontrollably, while Lucy, wearing an apron over her bandages, pulled a tray of misshapen, rustic chocolate chip cookies from the oven. Christian stood in the doorway, entirely frozen. He hadn't heard his children laugh like that since his wife died 3 years ago. The sound was a ghost returning to the halls. Lucy looked up, her face flushed from the heat. A smudge of flour on her nose. She saw the intimidating boss standing there and froze, expecting reprimand for disrupting the order of his house. Instead, Christian walked slowly into the kitchen. He looked at the messy counters, the joyful children, and the nervous, beautiful woman who had brought life back into his mausoleum. "Can I have one?" he asked quietly. Lucy blinked in surprise, then smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that made Christian's chest tighten. "Only if you have it with milk. House rules." The fragile peace Lucy was building within the estate's walls was a beautiful illusion, but illusions shatter. The reality of Christian's world was a dark, creeping tide that could not be kept at bay forever. It happened 3 weeks into her stay. It was past 2 in the morning. Lucy couldn't sleep. A phantom ache in her shoulder flared up, making her restless. She decided to head down to the massive library to find a book to distract her. The manor was tomb silent. The corridors bathed in the pale, silvery light of a full moon filtering through the high windows. As she descended the grand staircase, she heard the heavy front doors open, followed by the low, urgent murmur of voices. She paused, peering over the polished wooden banister into the grand foyer below. Christian had just walked in. He was accompanied by Marcus and another man Lucy didn't recognize. The sight of Christian made Lucy's breath catch in her throat, a cold spike of pure terror driving into her stomach. He looked like a monster. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, completely soaked in dark, wet crimson. Blood smeared across his jawline and hands. His face was a mask of absolute, terrifying cruelty, eyes flat and dead, jaw set in stone. He was holding a bloody rag, wiping his knuckles with a chilling, methodical calmness. "Dispose of the bodies," Christian commanded, his voice devoid of any human inflection. "Burn the warehouse. I want no trace of them left by sunrise. If Moroni's brother reaches out again, send him a piece of what's left." "Done, boss," Marcus said gruffly, turning back toward the door. Lucy shrank back against the shadows of the staircase, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a gasp. She knew what he was. She knew he was a criminal, but knowing it in the abstract and seeing the visceral, bloody proof of his brutality were two entirely different things. This was the man who gently cut the crusts off his daughter's sandwiches. This was the man who had looked at her with such profound gratitude in the hospital. Now, he stood below her, bathed in the blood of men he had just slaughtered. Suddenly, Christian stopped wiping his hands. His head snapped up, his predatory instincts catching the slight rustle of fabric on the stairs. His eyes, dark and dangerous, locked onto the shadows where Lucy was hiding. "Come down," he ordered, the softness he usually reserved for her completely absent. Trembling, Lucy stepped out of the shadows. She descended the remaining stairs slowly, pulling her robe tightly around her. She couldn't meet his eyes. She stared at the blood on his shirt, her heart hammering against her ribs. Christian stepped forward, dismissing the other man with a sharp wave of his hand. They were alone in the vast foyer. He looked at her, seeing the raw fear in her pale face. He saw the way she instinctively shrank away from him, the way a prey animal shrinks from a predator. A flash of genuine pain crossed his hardened features, quickly masked by cold stoicism. "You shouldn't be awake," he said, his voice lowering, trying to sound less threatening, but failing. Are you hurt?" she managed to whisper. her eyes fixed on the red stains. "It's not my blood," he replied flatly. "I heard what you said," Lucy murmured, finally forcing herself to look up into his eyes. "You killed them. They were the men who financed the hit at the diner." Christian stepped closer, the metallic scent of blood washing over her. "They paid for the bullet that nearly stopped your heart. They paid to have my children slaughtered. So yes, Lucy, I killed them. I took them apart." "It's horrible," she whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "All of this, it's just death." "It's my world," Christian said, his tone turning harsh, defensive. "It's the world you threw yourself into. Did you think I was a businessman? Did you think I filed lawsuits against the men who try to murder my family? I am a monster, Lucy. I have to be the biggest, most terrifying monster in the dark, so that the other monsters don't touch what is mine." He reached out, as if to touch her face, but stopped, looking down at his blood-stained hands. He pulled his hand back, clenching it into a fist. "I didn't want you to see this," he said quietly, a profound weariness suddenly overtaking him. "I tried to keep this house clean for them, for you, but the blood always seeps under the door." Lucy looked at the terrifying man in front of her. She saw the violence, the darkness, but for the first time, she also saw the crushing, suffocating weight of it. He was trapped in a cycle of endless war, fighting to protect a light he felt he didn't deserve. She didn't run away. She didn't scream. Taking a slow, trembling breath, she reached out her good hand and gently touched his bloody forearm. Christian flinched as if she had burned him, staring at her hand on his arm in shock. "Go wash up," Lucy said softly, her voice steadying. "The twins will be awake in a few hours. They shouldn't see their father like this. And neither should you." She turned and walked slowly back up the stairs, leaving the feared Mafia boss standing alone in the grand foyer, completely disarmed by the fragile grace of a waitress. The aftermath of that bloody night shifted the dynamic in the house. A heavy, unspoken tension hung in the air, a delicate tightrope they both walked. Christian kept his distance, burying himself in his study, while Lucy threw herself into spending time with the twins, desperate to shield them from the dark undercurrents of their father's life. It was a rainy Sunday afternoon when the ice finally broke. The estate was quiet, the storm outside mirroring the dreary mood within. Lucy was in the sunroom, curled up on a plush window seat, a book resting forgotten on her lap as she watched the rain lash against the glass. She heard the soft padding of footsteps and turned to see Christian entering the room. He looked different today. The sharp, intimidating suits were gone, replaced by a worn Henley shirt and soft linen pants. He looked tired, older, stripped of the terrifying armor he wore for the world. He didn't speak. He walked over to the grand piano sitting in the corner of the room, an instrument Lucy had never seen anyone touch. He sat down on the bench, staring at the keys for a long time. Then, his large, scarred hands began to move. The music that filled the room was breathtakingly beautiful, a complex, melancholy Chopin nocturne. The contrast was staggering. These hands, capable of such brutal violence, were now producing something so delicate, so heartbreakingly tender. Lucy watched him, captivated. When the final note faded into the sound of the rain, the silence stretched between them, thick with unsaid things. "My wife played," Christian said suddenly, his voice rough, staring at the keys. "Elena. She brought this piano into the house. After she died, I couldn't bear to hear it. I locked the lid for 3 years." Lucy slowly stood up and walked over to the piano, leaning gently against the polished wood. "What happened to her?" she asked softly, knowing it was a dangerous question, but needing to know the man behind the myth. Christian closed his eyes. "I killed her," he said flatly. Lucy flinched, her eyes widening. Not with my own hands, he clarified bitterly, looking up at her, his eyes filled with a hollow, ancient grief. She was a civilian, like you. She thought she could love the darkness out of me. But a rival family couldn't get to me, so they put a car bomb in her vehicle. I was supposed to be in it. She took the kid's car seat out that morning to clean it. If she hadn't, Leo and Mia would have burned with her. He looked back down at his hands. I built an empire of blood to ensure no one would ever be strong enough to hurt us again. I became a monster to protect the innocent things left in my life. And then, 3 weeks ago, my walls failed. My men failed. My guns failed. And a girl making minimum wage had to bleed to do what my entire empire couldn't. He looked up at Lucy, the vulnerability in his eyes entirely unguarded. I don't know how to be around you, Lucy. You look at me and you don't see the boss. You see the blood on my hands. But you don't run. You bake cookies with my children and you tell me to wash my hands like I'm a stray dog you let out of the rain. You are the only clean thing in my life, and I am terrified of ruining you. Lucy felt a lump form in her throat. She understood now. His cruelty wasn't born of malice. It was born of a desperate, suffocating fear. He was a man holding up a crumbling ceiling, terrified it would crush his children. You aren't ruining me, Christian, she said softly, reaching out and gently resting her hand over his on the piano keys. You're a dark room, yes, but you're not locking the doors. You let the light in when the kids are around. You let the light in when you let me stay. Christian looked at her hand resting on his. He turned his palm over, his large fingers gently wrapping around hers. The touch was electric, a spark of profound connection in the cold, cavernous house. Daddy. The moment shattered as Mia and Leo burst into the sunroom, carrying an overflowing box of crayons and a massive sheet of paper. We want to draw a castle, Leo announced, dropping the supplies on the coffee table. Christian let go of Lucy's hand, a small, genuine smile touching the corners of his mouth as he looked at his children. A castle, huh? Who's going to build the moat? Lucy smiled, moving to join the kids on the floor. I'll do the moat. Your dad can draw the dragons. He's good with scary things. Christian chuckled. A deep, rich sound that seemed to chase the shadows from the room. He joined them on the floor, his massive frame looking entirely out of place amidst the crayons. As Lucy watched him carefully draw a dragon for his daughter, the terrifying Mafia boss faded away, leaving only a devoted, broken father trying desperately to hold his family together. And in that quiet, rainy afternoon, Lucy realized she was no longer a guest in this golden cage. She was becoming part of it. Peace in the underworld is never permanent. It is merely the quiet intake of breath before the next scream. It was a Tuesday night. The manor was quiet, wrapped in the deceptive security of its high walls and armed patrols. Lucy was in the kitchen, pouring a glass of water before bed. Her shoulder still ached occasionally, a dull reminder of the diner, but the wound had mostly healed. She was comfortable here now. The house no longer felt like a tomb. It felt terrifyingly like home. The silence was shattered by a sound that made Lucy's blood run cold, the sharp, shrieking wail of the estate's perimeter alarms. The house plunged into darkness as the main power was violently cut, instantly replaced by the eerie, pulsing red glow of the emergency backup lights. Before Lucy could even drop her glass, the terrifying staccato pop of heavy automatic gunfire erupted from the front lawn, echoing through the massive stone halls. Christian appeared in the kitchen doorway like a ghost materialized from the shadows. He was holding a heavily modified assault rifle, his face a terrifying mask of lethal focus. He wasn't the father drawing dragons anymore. He was the apex predator, cornered in his den. Move, he barked, grabbing her uninjured arm and hauling her toward the back stairwell. Maroney's brother. He brought mercenaries. They breached the south gate. "The twins!" Lucy gasped, panic seizing her chest as she stumbled over her own feet in the red-lit darkness. "Marcus has them moving to the vault," Christian grunted, pushing her up the stairs. "Go down the service corridor. Code for the panic room is 0418. Do not stop until you are inside." "What about you?" she cried, hearing the gunfire growing louder. Closer. They were inside the house. "I'm going to kill every man who stepped on my property," he said coldly. He shoved her toward the narrow service hallway and turned back toward the main foyer, chambering around. Lucy ran. Her breath tore at her lungs, her bare feet slapping against the cold stone floor. She heard men shouting in Russian, the sound of heavy boots kicking open doors, the terrifying roar of close-quarters gunfire. The house was a war zone. She reached the heavy steel door of the panic room, hidden behind a bookshelf in the basement. She punched in the code, her hands shaking so violently she missed the keys twice. The heavy door hissed open. Inside, illuminated by soft blue light, Marcus was clutching a handgun, shielding the weeping twins in the corner. "Lucy!" Leo cried, breaking away from Marcus and running to her. Lucy dropped to her knees, scooping the boy up, wrapping her arms tightly around him and Mia. "I've got you. I've got you," she whispered fiercely. Marcus moved toward the door to seal it, but before he could punch the button, the heavy wooden door to the basement splintered open. A mercenary, clad in heavy tactical gear, stepped onto the landing. He saw the open panic room door and raised his weapon. Marcus fired, hitting the man in the shoulder, but the mercenary returned fire instantly. Marcus went down hard, clutching his leg with a grunt of pain. The mercenary moved down the stairs, bleeding but relentless, leveling his rifle directly at the panic room, where Lucy knelt with the children. It was the diner all over again. The slow motion, the terror, the absolute certainty of death. Lucy pushed the twins behind her into the corner, standing up to place her body entirely between them and the door. She closed her eyes, bracing for the impact, praying it would be fast. But the gunshot didn't come. A shadow dropped from the landing above. Christian descended upon the mercenary with the feral, devastating violence of a wild animal. He didn't use his rifle. There was no room. He used a combat knife, driving it into the gap in the mercenary's body armor with brutal, terrifying efficiency. The man gurgled and collapsed. Christian stood over the body, breathing heavily, entirely drenched in blood. He looked up, his wild, murderous eyes locking onto Lucy. When he saw that she was standing over his children, shielding them again, the bloodlust drained from his face, replaced by a profound, shuddering relief. He dropped the knife and stepped into the panic room, hitting the emergency seal button. The heavy steel door slid shut with a pneumatic hiss, locking out the war, locking out the world. He looked at Marcus, who was bandaging his leg, then dropped to his knees in front of Lucy and the twins. He pulled all three of them into his massive, blood-soaked arms. He buried his face in Lucy's neck, his massive shoulders shaking violently. "You're safe," he rasped, his voice breaking completely. "You're safe. I've got you." Lucy wrapped her arms around his neck, holding the terrifying Mafia boss as he wept in the dark. In that blood-soaked embrace, amidst the terror and the violence, she realized the terrifying truth. She didn't just care for the children anymore. She loved the monster who protected them. The morning sun broke through the heavy clouds, casting brilliant rays of light over the sprawling estate. The lawn was scarred, the gates were broken, and an army of men in dark suits were quietly, efficiently scrubbing the violence from the property. But inside the manor, a strange, heavy quiet had settled. The threat of the Maroney family was entirely, permanently eradicated. The war was over. Lucy stood on the balcony of her suite, wrapped in a thick shawl, watching the cleanup crews below. Her bags were packed and sitting by the door. She had been here for 2 months. She was fully healed. The danger was gone. The logical, sensible thing was to call a cab, return to her life, and leave this beautiful, terrifying world behind. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. Christian entered. He looked exhausted, but there was a profound peace in his eyes that hadn't been there before. He was wearing a simple gray sweater, his hands thrust into his pockets. He looked at the packed bags by the door, and a muscle feathered in his jaw. "Marcus has a car waiting out front," Christian said quietly, his voice tight. "He'll take you wherever you want to go. A new apartment, a new city. I've set up a blind trust. You'll never have to worry about money again." Lucy turned to face him, leaning back against the balcony railing. "So, that's it? Debt paid? Transaction complete?" Christian flinched, stepping fully into the room. "You know it's not a transaction, Lucy. You know what you mean to this family. What you mean to them." He couldn't quite say the word me. "But this world, look at what happened last night. I can't keep you in a cage of violence. You are an angel who flew into a war zone. You deserve a quiet life. A clean life." Lucy walked slowly across the room, stopping inches from him. She looked up into his dark, complicated eyes. "You think I want a quiet life?" she asked softly. "You think I want to go back to pouring coffee for strangers? Going home to an empty apartment? Pretending I don't know what it feels like to actually belong somewhere?" "You belong in the light, Lucy," Christian whispered, reaching out to gently trace the line of her jaw, his touch feather light, as if he were afraid of breaking her. "I am darkness. I will drag you down." "You didn't drag me down last night, Christian," Lucy said fiercely, stepping into his touch, resting her hand over his on her cheek. "You saved me. You saved your children. I saw the monster they all fear, but I also see the man who plays Chopin in the rain. I see the father who cuts crusts off sandwiches. You aren't just darkness. You're just a man trying to protect the people he loves." Christian's breath hitched. He stared at her, entirely disarmed, the formidable walls he had built around his heart crumbling into dust. "Lucy, I don't want your money, Christian," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I don't want a new city. I want to stay. Not as a guest, not as a debt you have to repay. If you stay," Christian warned, his voice a low, desperate gravel, his forehead resting gently against hers, "I will never let you go. I will bind you to this family. You will be mine, and I will burn down the world to keep you safe." Lucy smiled, a brilliant, fearless smile that reached her eyes. She reached up, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Then burn it down," she whispered. Christian didn't hesitate anymore. He pulled her flush against his chest, capturing her lips in a kiss that held all the desperation, the fear, and the profound, world-altering love he had kept locked away. It was a promise, sealed not in blood, but in the fierce, unyielding light she had brought into his life. Down the hall, the sound of tiny footsteps approached. The door swung open, and Leo and Mia ran in, stopping short as they saw their father holding Lucy. "Lucy, are you leaving?" Mia asked, her lip trembling as she looked at the packed bags. Christian slowly pulled back, keeping one arm securely around Lucy's waist. He looked down at his children, then back at the woman who had taken a bullet for them. A true, genuine smile broke across the Mafia boss's face. "No, Mia," Christian said softly, pulling Lucy closer. "She's not leaving. She's finally home." True heroism isn't found in the absence of fear, but in the desperate, beautiful choice to protect the vulnerable, even when the cost is everything. Lucy's selfless leap into the crossfire didn't just save 2 innocent lives. It shattered the hardened, cynical armor of a man who believed the world was only built on violence. It proves that a single act of pure, selfless love has the power to redeem the darkest of souls, proving that sometimes the greatest strength isn't found in a weapon, but in an open heart. If this story of sacrifice, redemption, and unexpected love touched your heart, please like, share this story with your friends, and subscribe for more gripping, emotional tales.